In today's video, I'm going to continue with and finish up my journey through the Imperial Legion's questline featured in the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Last time, I finished up my duties with Imsin the Dreamer. She had me rescue a fellow knight from the Daedric ruins of Ashinabibi, as well as retrieve a maiden's token from a rogue Telvanni wizard. After that, the next commanding officer I reported to was Rad Hardheart over in Moonmoth Legion Fort. His tasks involved rescuing other Imperial citizens from their captors, aiding the fishing village of Narmok, as well as ridding Dagon Fel of a vile necromancer. This is where the story continues. Chatting with Rad once more, he opened up by saying that I was ready for an advancement. Ascending to the rank of Knight Protector, he gifted me Imperial Templar pauldrons as well as boots. This makes the complete set, and it was looking pretty good. It felt like I truly belonged in the Legion. When ready, I asked Rad for more orders, and that's when he informed me that that was it for him. He had no further tasks to give me, and said to check in with the other forts. Doing the math, the only other outpost that'll offer me work is Ebonheart, so I knew my time here for this questline was coming to an end. Legging it over to Balmora and taking the various transportation services, I landed in the Empire's central hub on Vardenfell and asked around for my commanding officer. I was apparently to report to someone named Frald the White. I could find this Frald in the Hawkmoth Legion garrison area. I didn't really know my way around Ebonheart very well, so I cased some of the buildings for a little bit until I landed on the Hawkmoth nameplate. Entering the fort, I noticed a big, burly, white-haired Nord wandering around and figured that this was the person I needed to speak with. It was indeed Mr. White, and chatting with him, he gave me my next set of orders, although they were a little strange. Frald tells me that the Boyan Armigers have claimed that the Legion has no courtesy. Inquiring about what he means, White explains that Salin Serethi, an Armiger over at the Ghost Gate's Tower of Dusk, has been running his mouth off about the Legion. Frald wants me to go over there and prove that the Empire is cultured. As I said before, I found this task to be rather strange. It feels more like a petty personal issue of Frald's and less like a pressing matter that needs to be taken care of by the Legion. Of course, the Dunmer are going to banter about the Empire. That's just kind of how these things go when you've taken over their land. This feels like one of those moments when you're a kid and another child says something quote-unquote mean to you on the playground. An adult would then tell you to ignore it because it's meaningless. I think Frald needs an adult in his life, but for now, at this moment, I'll be the older sibling who stands up to his bully. Also, as an aside, there are a lot of Nords in the Legion, at least high-ranking members. I bet the Empire lost a lot of trusted higher-ups as soon as Talos worship was banned, because it seems like the northern folk make up a decent portion of their officers. In any case, after some time traveling on foot, I made it to the Tower of Dusk and went on inside. Looking around for a bit, I soon descended to the lower level, stuck my head into a couple of rooms, and spotted Salin Serethi. When the topic of courtesy was brought up, he doubled down on what he had said, claiming the Legion has no wit, poetry, or honor. Although, Serethi will apparently take his words back if I can beat him at a game of riddles. He explains that he'll recite the riddle, and then I must answer back with a rhyme. As long as he's not going to ask what's in his pocket, I think I should be good here. Telling him I'm ready to go, he starts with the first one. It has a tail, a side, and a head. I call it what I call a snake. It has no body, and it is dead. Now, because my intelligence is above a certain level, my character actually knows the answers to all of the riddles. If it wasn't a high enough level though, I would have needed to purchase a book from Codex Colonis and study its contents. Unfortunately, they make the answer quite obvious here, as my character's only logical response is, it must be a drake. I was hoping that I would actually get to participate in the fun and challenge, but that doesn't seem to be the case. The next riddle was, poets know the hearts of men in myrrh, but beasts can't know my heart, you see. This book was written by a bear. The answer to this one is, then it's not poetry. The final riddle Salin says is, I gave you a sock, not unlike a box, with hammers and nails all around it. 2 lids open when it knocks. The answer to this one is, it must have been a great hit. Apparently, my character is cultured and I'm not, because there was no way I was getting any of these. Maybe the first one with the Drake, but that second one was way over my head, and the third one didn't make any sense to me at all either. In the end though, Salen was impressed with my sense of wit and poetry and declared that the Legion had courtesy after all. A job well done and nobody needed to die. That's a win in my books. Recalling to Ebonheart, I spoke with Thrald and told him that he won't be getting bullied anymore. He said that Salen Serethi was the best of the buoyant armigers, which I found to be a pretty neat fact. Since I've proven myself to be a true man of culture, White hands me the book 2920 Second Seed as a reward. Giving it a read, it boosted my speechcraft skill by 1 point. With that, thus ends the quest, courtesy. Chatting with Thrald once again, he said that I was ready for another advancement through the faction. Rubbing my hands together, anticipating a brand new weapon, he then told me that I needed to speak with Varus Vatinius, the Knight of the Imperial Dragon, if I wanted to be promoted any further. Officially getting science-sacked, I went ahead and just asked him for more orders. Mr. White said that he wanted me to find the traitor, Honthjolf. Intrigued, I wanted to hear more. Thrald explains that Honthjolf was once a member of the Ebonheart Order, but deserted the Empire and sought work as a guard for someone named Laruse Andrethi. The Nord and Andrethi can be found in the cave, a Harnabi, which apparently contains sorcerers and Daedra worshippers. It's located in the southeast corner of Azura's coast, not far off from the shrine itself. Sounding simple enough, I repaired my gear and stocked on supplies. This included buying a new sword. I was just over using the Imperial broadsword. I needed something new and fresh to fight with. I didn't want to be super OP or anything like that, but I at least wanted a small upgrade. I landed on the Silver Claymore, a two-handed blade that dealt significantly more damage than the broadsword, but still nowhere near as much as Hope's Fire. With all of that out of the way, I set off for the southeast region of Vardenfell. Luckily, I've gotten far enough in the main questline to where Blata Hateria's transportation services are available to me. She took me over to the Azura's Coast region, and from there, the shrine to Azura was a brief walk away. It took me a little bit to actually find the entrance to the caves though. A Harnabi was nice and tucked away among the rocks and sea. I crisscrossed in between the small islands, scrolled along the minimap, got a bird's eye view using Levitate, but for some reason, this dungeon just didn't want to present itself to me. Searching for the cave probably took longer than actually clearing out the cave and locating Honthjolf. Eventually, I ended up finding the entrance and went on in. Right away, an Altmer sorceress came charging over at me. She must have forgotten how to use her hands or something like that because she just walked right up and accepted her fate. From there, I meandered through the tunnels and came across a few Atronachs. Their attacks certainly countered my fighting style here. Due to the small space, it was hard to maneuver and dodge their spells. They even backhanded me a few times, humbling my character and dropping them to the ground. The rest of the mages in here though weren't too tricky to deal with. The defense was pretty lackluster, and it seems like my Silver Claymore was handier than I initially thought. The first big name I came across was Laruse Andrethi. Using the barriers and objects in her camp to my advantage, I was able to bull rush her on the platform and execute the sorceress without any problems. I then helped myself to her things, although none of it was really that useful or valuable for my needs. Walking to the other side of the dungeon, there was only one NPC left. Getting in close, he began to charge me on the rickety wooden bridge, and glaring at him long enough, I saw that it was a Nord in Imperial armor. I was sure he was Honthjolf. He actually kind of looked like Geralt from The Witcher, which I thought to be pretty neat. I wish I could say our fight was hard fought and long, but truth be told, the Atronachs gave me more trouble than he did. A couple of good smacks with my blade, and the traitor was bested. He didn't really have anything worthwhile on his person, and his camp was significantly less stocked than Andrethi's. With all of that wrapped up, I recalled to Ebonheart and reported to Thrald. He said that it was always disheartening when someone betrays the Legion, but deserters get dealt with the same way as any other outlaw. With that, thus ends the quest. Honthjolf is a traitor. Chatting again with White and asking him for further orders, he tells me that there's an ordinator named Suryn Athones who's slandering the good name of the Order of Ebonheart. Again, Thrald's fragile ego was on display. Jokes aside, he said that Suryn could be found at the justice offices in Vivec, and he wants me to silence him for good. It seems a little drastic, but at the same time, people can challenge and kill whoever they want on Vardenfell for no good reason. Levitating over to the dock, I bought passage via boat to Vivec, and from there, I made my way into the justice offices and looked around for Athones. Mess with the Order of Ebonheart, and you mess with all of us type of mentality. I soon landed on the man of the hour and sized him up. I've taken on Ordinators before, so this one should have been a cakewalk. Before I got to busting kneecaps, I wanted to hear him out. When the topic of slander was brought up, Suryn said that he was only speaking the truth. Already, he was docked a few points. He called the Legion, quote, a mob of blunt-eared apes playing at being soldiers. A couple more points lost on that one. He then finished off by asking if it was due to us being cowards, our incompetence, or perhaps just the way we smell. Well, it was now time to show him what this blunt-eared ape could do. I shut the door leading back out into the Hall of Justice, trapping us two alone in the room, so that way nobody could hear his screams. Cracking my knuckles and rolling my shoulders back, I initiated things with frenzy, and the brawl had begun. Legionnaire versus Ordinator, the Empire against the Tribunal. Unfortunately for me, my claymore wasn't really capable of delivering any meaningful blows on Suryn. It kinda made me look bad, and I couldn't really show him my full might, but I figured this way, with a super weak weapon, it would send a message. I repeatedly swung my blade at his head over and over again, slowly taking chunks out of his HP. He kept battering me with his dinky mace, and to be honest, if not for my DPS and range, he probably would have bested me. Proving my Donkey Kong-like might, I delivered the killing blow, and Suryn's mouth was permanently shut. His enchanted mace, Gavel of the Ordinator, seemed pretty cool, but I didn't really have much use for it personally. I know that he technically challenged us with his slander, but this felt like it could have been the start of a turf war. It felt wrong and illegal to have killed him like this, but as mentioned before, it sends a message to the rest of his kin. Leaving Athones' corpse to rot in the justice offices, I recalled to Ebonheart and informed Thrall of Suryn's death. White said it was good work, and that he wanted relations to continue with the Ordinators, but Athones couldn't be left alive after tarnishing the Empire's name like that. With that, thus ends the quest, Suryn Athones' Slanders. Chatting with Thrall again, I felt a pep in my step after that last task, so I asked him for further orders. This was when White gave me a juicy one. Apparently, a member of the Ebonheart Order, Saprius Entius, has committed a murder and needs to be found by the Legion before the Ordinators get to him. With my interest piqued, I asked for further information. Thrall says that Entius needs to be recovered by the Legion and brought to the mainland for a fair trial. If the Ordinators find him first, they won't be giving him a fair judgment, or really any judgment at all. Thrall believes that Saprius is hiding somewhere in Vivec City. Well, now I'm really curious as to what exactly Entius did. Obviously he killed someone, but who and why? I have a theory that Suryn, the Ordinator from the previous quest, wasn't the only member of that faction to talk about the Legion in that way. My bet is that someone else slandered the Empire right in front of Saprius. They probably egged him on too. Entius likely jumped the gun and slew the guard, but it wasn't a fair challenge by Vvardenfell standards. So, in the eyes of the Ordinators and by the laws of the land, it was deemed as a murder. So far, I've been really enjoying the variety of tasks provided by Thrall the White. It's not just rescue this person or bring me this item. The story and plot surrounding each of his quests feels very unique and different from one another, at least to me. And not going to lie, as much as I've been harping on him for taking things too personally, I've been really entertained with all of the local tensions and squabbles. Once in Vivec, I began asking around for more information on Saprius. It was mostly the Ordinators who had a dialogue prompt for him, but they refused to give me anything useful. However, when talking to Saryn Othrelin, a random NPC, he said that he saw one of my kind, I'm assuming he meant a Legionnaire, over by the arena. Following the lead and entering the pit, I asked another NPC for more info, and they told me that an Imperial guard was hiding out in the underworks. Descending the canton, I crossed paths with a whole bunch of Ordinators and thought for sure that my man Entius was in for a world of trouble. Making it to the storage area and exterminating a few rats, I spotted the lone soldier off in one of the side rooms. He was set up pretty good down here. A bedroll, some candles, a handful of supplies. I've definitely seen worse. Trying to talk with him, he was in a panic. He asked who I was, said that he needed help. The Ordinators were looking for him, he did something terrible, etc., Then, all of a sudden, he set to look out behind me. Quickly spinning around, 2 Ordinators had followed me down here and began their assault on Saprius. Worried that he would get overwhelmed and killed, I jumped in front of their attacks and took the brunt of the damage. A few swings on each with my silver claymore, and their full attention was on me. To tell you the truth, this was a really long fight. I was barely lowering their HP, and Entius was trying his best, but he wasn't very effective. Luckily, the Ordinator's attacks were equally as futile, and my longsword's reach was able to keep them at bay. Time went on, the cycles of battle repeated themselves, and eventually, one of the Ordinators fell. Soon after that, the second one went down, and Saprius' life was spared, for now. Speaking to him once more, he asked me to escort him out of the city and back to Ebonheart. I agreed, and he mentioned that we should probably try to keep out of sight. I wasn't sure what to expect here. I thought that if he crossed paths with an Ordinator, that would have been another brawl that I was going to have to get involved in. In fact, climbing up the stairs of the canal works, I turned the corner and wouldn't you know it, an Ordinator was patrolling his route. He was standing right in front of me, blocking my path. Turning around, Entius was awkwardly standing in the stairwell, moments from being seen. Deciding to just let fate take its course, I let him reach the top platform. The 2 men stared at each other and in classic Morrowind fashion, resumed their walk, blocking the other from moving anywhere. It was clear that the Ordinators didn't care for, or at least recognize him at the moment, so we were able to flee the city undetected. Making it to the docks and paying for passage back to Ebonheart, I then escorted him to Fort Hawkmoth. To be honest, I feel that this trial that's being put on by the Empire for Entius is just a formality. For past quests, like the very first one in the story, the Vabdus Deed, I was told to just kill the orc who secretly murdered someone. The fact that I had to go and rescue Saprius, bring him back to Ebonheart, and then for him to get a trial outside of Vardenfell, this guy was probably getting shipped off to Tamriel's version of Argentina. No extradition laws or anything of the sorts. Once we hit the fort, he thanked me for the escort and said that he was going to wait on the word from Thrall the White. With my duties all wrapped up, I returned to the Nord and gave him my report. He expressed his joy that both of us made it back safe and sound, and said that he's going to find a way to smuggle Entius back to Cyrodiil. I bet he will. As a reward, Thrall gave me his father's enchanted helmet. It's a regular Legionnaire's helm, and it has the effect of reflect for 10%. With that, thus ends the quest, Saprius Entius. Chatting with Thrall one more time, I asked him for more orders, and this was when he informed me that that was it for him. He suggested that I go and speak directly with the Knight of the Imperial Dragon himself, Varys Vittinius. At this point, I knew that I was entering endgame territory for the storyline. I've experienced it enough times to where I know the final events are upon me when I get sent to meet the leader of the faction. In terms of finding the guy though, nobody really told me where he was. I figured he had to be somewhere in the Grand Council area, but other than that, no clue. Now, Thrall mentioned that the Duke and the Emperor's representatives were all huddled together in the same space, so I thought it best to check there first. After a little bit of time spent walking up the wrong towers of the castle, I soon found Vidam Dren, and Vittinius was with him. Fun fact, Thrall kept saying his name wrong, so you can blame him for my previous mispronunciations. Speaking with Varys, he told me that I was ready for advancement. Excited, I asked for promotion, and this was when I yet again got indigo-egged. He said that I needed to follow all of his orders first before any advancement was in order. With nothing else to do but to obey his commands, I asked for my first task. Vittinius said that if I wished to become a Knight of the Garland of the Order of Ebonheart, what a mouthful, I'd need to retrieve 2 artifacts that were stolen from the Order. The first of which is the Lord's Mail. According to Varys, the Lord's Mail is an enchanted cuirass, also known as the Armor of Morrowind. It's always been on display in the shrine area of the Imperial Commission, but it's recently gone missing. He hands me a key to get into the shrine and sends me on my way. Now, not to spoil anything, however, since I've done the side quest, Anasi, a special friend, I know exactly what's going on here. For further context, I returned to Thrall the White and asked him about the armor piece. He told me that Rufinus Elias over in the Imperial Commission might know more about it, so seeking out the old wise man and getting his input, he said that his best guess was that Furious Achilles took it. Furious was apparently kicked out of the Legion a while ago, and on his way out, he brought up the Cuirass as well as secret tunnels that exist below Ebonheart. Putting 2 and 2 together, it seems like I have my culprit and their location. Now, heading into an already unlocked shrine area, I can clearly see that a key piece of equipment missing from the altar is a chest plate. By the altar itself is an already revealed secret passageway that leads into the underground caves. As mentioned previously, I needed to use these once before for a side quest, so I knew my way around. Meandering through the system, I soon arrived at a cross section. Taking the pathway leading north, I quickly happened across a lone soldier standing by a makeshift camp. His cuirass looked like a legionnaire's, except it was enchanted, further tipping me off that this was the guy. Getting in close and chatting with him, it was indeed Furious, and he was furious. He asked what I was doing here and said that everyone in the Legion was an idiot. I'm apparently the first one to find him, but he's gonna make sure that I'm the last. The conversation ends and the battle begins. He takes out his katana and I pull out my claymore. Even though we're in a cave, the battlefield felt more spacious than some of the recent areas I've had to fight in. It was a pretty standard brawl. He wasn't really able to do anything special to me, and I kept my distance, swinging away with the longsword. As per usual, the whole ordeal was lengthy. He had a good amount of health, but there were no surprises or curveballs from him. Soon enough, I delivered the killing blow and looted his corpse. I decided that I wanted to take and use his demon katana. This was in order to get some weapon diversity for the upcoming tasks. As for the Lord's Mail, well, it had the enchantment of curing poison on self, which actually seemed really useful. It also had the ability to resist magic for 20 to 30%, which, again, not bad at all. With one artifact secured, I returned to Varys and handed it over to him. Interestingly, I was given the prompt to keep it, or at least not to give it over in the moment. I wonder what would have happened if I had chosen to do that instead. In any case, he expressed his gratitude by making me a knight of their order and by giving me the Duke's Guard's silver cuirass. As for the second artifact, Vantinius asked me to recover something called Chrysamere. It's spelled with a CH, but pronouncing it as Chrysamere just feels right. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. In any case, Chrysamere, or as it's also called, the Paladin's Blade, is a legendary sword. It was apparently stolen by a traitor of the Order and is now in possession of someone named Joramu, a mighty witch located near Sadrith Mora. I'm to defeat her and reclaim the blade in the name of the Legion. Sounding slightly more complicated than a hermit in the basement, I readied myself and sought transportation to the Telvanni town. Peering at the silver cuirass, its armor rating was a little better than the piece I had on now, and it looked pretty cool too, so I equipped it. Arriving at the coast, I knew that Hloryn was around here somewhere, but I didn't know exactly where. In order to find out this information, I paid a visit to one of my old friends, Angaradel. Asking him about the sorceress, the Dunmer replied that he wouldn't dare to even mention her name around here. With my interest officially piqued, I charmed him and tried again. This time, he reluctantly spilled the beans and said that she's holed up in the caves of Abanabi, which are to the southwest of town. Angaradel warns me though that she's likely being guarded by fierce creatures and her followers. Exiting the gateway inn and gathering my bearings, I headed further inland and looked around for an entrance to the dungeon. Unlike Aharnabi, Abanabi was a lot easier for me to spot. Clearing the doorway outside, I readied my weapon and made my way into the cave. In here, I encountered quite a few flame atronachs. My experience with them is that they die the quickest, but they hit the hardest, so I had to be very careful. Of course, there were also the odd frost and storm atronachs too. I was just counting my luck that there were no Dremora lords or golden saints that needed to be fought. At one point, I entered a room and a human sorceress came charging over at me. I was pretty sure that she wasn't the infamous Joramu, and that was confirmed upon her quick defeat. She had a small camp setup, and among it was a conjuration skill book, so the little detour was all worth it. Continuing along, battling more Daedric's servants, and utilizing my magic, I soon came to the final room. At the back of the space, on a platform resting above the lake, I noticed a lone dark elf. Levitating over and approaching her, she became hostile. Silver claymore in hand, I gave her a real good smackdown. She didn't get a single hit off on me, and the stagger effect from my attacks was working wonders. She went down in no time, and her nameplate confirmed her identity of Joramu Hloryn. On her person, she had the legendary paladin blade, Chrysamere. It was a two-handed longsword, and it had the enchantments of resist fire for 5 to 20% for 30 seconds, restore health for 5 to 20 points, and reflect for another 5 to 20% for 30 seconds. Not a bad blade at all. However, I already knew that Varys was going to claim it for himself. Looting the surrounding area of any potential treasures, I then recalled to Ebonheart and presented the sword to the Knight of the Imperial Dragon. Again, I had the option to keep it for myself, but wanted to properly progress through the storyline. As a thank you, Ventinius named me a Knight of the Garland, the second highest rank one can possibly get to in the Legion. With that, thus ends the quest, Lord's Mail. Chatting with Varys once more, his opening line was him saying that I was still ready for further promotion. Testing my luck, Ventinius informs me that there can only be one Knight of the Imperial Dragon here on Vvardenfell. In order to receive the title, I would need to duel and defeat him in the arena. Sounding good with me, he dramatically continued by saying that he'd rather die than be stripped of his rank, and that I should prepare for battle immediately. Giving him the old 2 thumbs up, I began to make my way over to Balmora in order to take out and put away some gear. I wasn't going to bust out the glass armor, or Hope's Fire, or anything like that. I just knew that once Ventinius was dead and it came time to loot the artifacts from his corpse, I'd need ample carrying space. Making the necessary deposits and withdrawals, all of my affairs were finally in order, and I went onwards to Vivek's arena. At this point in time, I knew that this was the last quest for the storyline. So far, it's how almost every single faction has ended. I was ready to add another body to the arena's pit. I guess for this fight though, it seemed like it was on good and honorable terms. The last few duels for leadership were a bit rocky and not very amicable. Stepping foot inside of the canton, I heard Varys shout up to me from the sandy depths below. Approaching the ledge and looking over, I could have hacked a loogie on his head from up here and there was nothing he could have done about it. In a not so fair fashion, I tried casting a few fire attacks at him, but karma was good and I ended up being a horrible shot. Not wanting to avoid the conflict any longer, I jumped down and the fight began. I was sporting the Demon Katana and Imperial Shield, while he donned the Lord's Mail and equipped Chrysamere. Of course, my hard work was going to be used against me. Fortunately, even though he was wielding a wicked blade, he seldomly landed his hits. However, with his health barely lowering and me continuously swinging away, wasting my energy, I figured I could use some of his own tricks against him. Approaching Bolvin Venom's corpse, a man who's been down here for a long time, I finally snagged the Daedric Daikatana from his cold dead body. I knew that would come in handy one of these days. Equipping it, I gave Varys 2 good slashes, and already I saw that it was too much for him to handle. So, wanting to be fair and at least give him a fighting opportunity, I swapped back to the Demon Blade. From there, I patiently and meticulously worked away at his health until finally, the killing blow was delivered. I received a journal update informing me that I was now the Knight of the Imperial Dragon here on Vvardenfell. Looting his corpse, I took back my hard-earned artifacts, and with that, the long journey has officially come to an end. Recalling to Ebonheart, I got confirmation, as well as affirmation, from Thrall the White that I was the person in charge now, or at least there were no further orders for me, as well as no further advancements. Thus ends the quest, Grandmaster Duel, as well as the Imperial Legion storyline. Now, let's talk about some of my thoughts and feelings regarding this questline. I tried my best to throw in some opinions for each of the individual quests, so that way you kind of had an idea of where my head was at with things. For this portion, I figured I'd just talk about my likes, dislikes, questions, and comments for each set of quests provided by a commanding officer. I'm going to be brutally honest and as candid as possible, so I hope you enjoy my opinions, disagree with them, agree with them, whatever. The first one I'll start off with is Darius. Darius's tasks were my introduction to the faction. There were 5 jobs that needed to be completed, and for beginner level missions, I thoroughly enjoyed them. My highlights were Widow Vabdis's Deed, as well as Talos Cult Conspiracy. To me, those had the most depth to them. They involved corruption and treason amongst the Legion, showing that for every handful of good soldiers, there are some bad ones lurking in the shadows. Anytime Emperor Uriel Septim VII is brought up in the games, I'm always intrigued and my attention is captured. To have yet another plot against his life put forward, no matter how minor, is just so interesting and yet confusing to me, especially when it comes from the Talos cult, a club that's supposed to revere Tiber Septim. You'd think that same love would have trickled down to his distant heirs. The Vabdis deed, to me, demonstrated some of the better qualities of the Legion. Obviously, not through the fact that a member murdered an innocent man, but through what was done to make amends. Darius knew that there wasn't anything he could really do for the widowed Vabdas that would make things right, but he at least sought retribution against Logrub, put an end to the pursuit of the widow's land, and helped contribute towards a relief fund. If I had to pick one quest out of the 5 that was my least favorite, I guess it would be Nissus Eggmine. This was where I cured the Quama Queen of her blight, restoring operations to the Eggmine. It just seemed like such a simple task that should have been done ages ago. I'm not entirely sure why the Death's Head Legion waited for a new guy to come in, just so he could do what any old murderous orc could have been tasked with, firing off a scroll from a distance, thereby restoring public relations with the citizens and bringing prosperity and joy back to the town. The next block of quests I'll discuss are Imson the Dreamers. Now, I think it's because she only has 3 tasks, the shortest of any of the commanding officers, barring Varys, as well as the fact that I split her quests into 2 videos, that they just weren't very memorable for me. I never got to see a proper outcome for Draenor Varian's Dwemer artifacts. Jonsis Dalamax was the second of too many rescue missions, and the Maiden's Token felt like it should have offered more backstory. If I had to pick a favorite, I think it would be Dwemer artifacts at Draenor Varian's place, simply because of how different it was to all of the other quests, but really that's about it. It also felt like a very Legion-oriented task, busting down doors, inspecting homes for illegal goods, and reporting back to the garrison. My least favorite of the 3 tasks was probably Rescue Jonsis Dalamax. As I just mentioned, the rescue missions got old for me very quickly. At the time, I don't think I minded the quest that much, but after completing everything and looking back, it just sort of flattened some of the experience for me. Again though, the best way I would describe it is not very memorable. With only 3 quests to provide, it just felt like they were in one ear, out the other, what's the next task sort of thing. Next up, we have Rad Hardheart's quests. He was tied with Darius for the most missions to offer at 5 each. To me, Rad's quests are ones that I have the most mixed feelings about. The ones that I enjoyed, I loved. The ones that I didn't, I just sort of shake my head. That comes off a little harsher than I want it to, but it's kind of true. The quests that I didn't like were Scrap Metal, Rescue Danza, and Breeding Netch. Scrap Metal I can give a small break to, because I know that it was meant to ease the player into the Legionnaire lifestyle and questline. If it was a quest that could be done early on, like right after joining the Legion, then yeah, I get it, I understand its purpose. If not though, and all of Darius's quests need to be completed first, then it just feels like kind of a waste of time. For me, Rescue Danza was a nuisance, and same thing with Breeding Netch. It felt like it took longer to travel to Narmok than it did to actually kill Danza's captors and bring her to safety. It felt like a placeholder quest for something that should have been at least a little more interesting and offered a little more story. As for Breeding Netch, the fact that it's also a miscellaneous quest lets me know that this for sure was a last-minute substitute for something that got cut out. If it was done already as a side quest, Rad pretty much skips over it, and his missions are then cut down to 4, showing how truly unimportant it was. Now, as I mentioned before, the ones I liked, I loved. I really enjoyed Rescue Josie and Answa, as well as Sorkville the Raven. I know I said that I was tired of rescue missions, and it's true, I am, but with this one, they at least made it really interesting. Instead of steamrolling through a short dungeon and escorting someone back outside, I got to negotiate the release of a prisoner with an outcast Ashlander tribe. I got to learn a little more about the Mabergash, Josie and Answa, and I got to banter with Asaba Bentis. It felt like I had learned new lore, and got to experience a completely different gameplay style. With Sorkville the Raven, well before I was sent to kill him, everybody in Dagon Fell warned me of the evil necromancer who lived in his tower outside of town. The setup and build up to the whole thing was perfect, because when I received the quest, I felt this air of infamy and intimidation surrounding Sorkville. I had enough backstory to feel interested in what was going on, and it truly felt like my actions were going to go a long way for the locals. Next, I wanted to talk about Fraud the White's quests. He had 4 jobs to give the player, and I can honestly say that I enjoyed each and every one of them. I received enough background information on each mission to where I was actually invested and curious on the outcome. It wasn't just go to this place, kill this outlaw, and come back, or go and rescue this person from a cave. The quests Courtesy and Suryn Athones' Slanders delved into the tensions and political divide between the Empire and the Temple. We get to see firsthand the cold ground war that's raging between the Legionnaires and the Ordinators, a silent story that's actually been one of the loudest in all of Morrowind. We even got to see it more prevalent than ever with Saprius Entius. He murdered someone, likely an Ordinator or someone influential within the tribunal, as the guards were not willing to show any mercy nor willing to give him a fair trial. Pretty much all of these quests were short but sweet, conveying their message to the player, ensuring that they understand the underlying story, and then cutting it off before it drags on for too long. If I had to pick my least favorite, I suppose it would be Honthjolf is a traitor, because that one falls under the go here and kill this person, trust me, they're bad category. I still enjoyed it, but I would be kind of hypocritical if I didn't call it out for what it was. Technically, Suryn Slanders does the same, but he literally egged the player on, and we know the underlying story of what's actually going on there. Lastly, we have Varys Ventinius' quests. He only had 2 for the player, and I found one to be very interesting and unique, while the other was extremely predictable. There weren't a whole lot of fetch quests in the Imperial Legion storyline, something in which I really appreciate. So, when Varys told me to go retrieve the Lord's Mail and Chrysamere, I really didn't mind that much. The story was laid out nicely, adequate background information was supplied, both artifacts were meaningful and held power to the original parties, and the means of retrieval for both pieces was unique enough to keep me entertained. Now, for Grandmaster Duel, I understand that this is an age-old tradition on Vvardenfell and perhaps in the Empire, that the reigning champion or leader or whoever of a faction gets challenged to a fight to the death for their title. I get it, it's fine, but it just feels like an anticlimactic way to end the questline. I'd rather have one last hoorah of a quest where maybe it's Ordinators versus Legion in a turf war, or the Talos cult, which happened to have had a lot more influence than we originally thought, gets eradicated. Something big and grand like that. Spoiler alert, in the Mages Guild, Trebonius had me kill all of the Telvanni counselors, which was a world-changing event. For the Fighters Guild, Suryn Hardheart had me take out the leaders of the Thieves Guild. I don't always need something as big and grand like that, but I suppose I just wanted an event that would have left its footprint on the game. Overall, I really enjoyed the Legion's questline. I know through my review it might have felt more like a critique than a glaze, but I had a mostly positive experience. It was a nice length, only 19 quests, which is much shorter than most of the other factions. For the story that Bethesda decided to tell, they respected my time and kept my interest peaked for almost all of it. I'd love to know your thoughts on the Imperial Legion's questline down below, and until next time, keep on adventuring.